Hello. So let's speak a little bit about how to create transitions or animations using D3. So the way you create animations in D3 in Observable is quite special because of all of the reactivity, but most of the concepts will apply with everything else. So I want to recreate in here one of the charts that I've been doing in 2020 for the coronavirus pandemic. It's actually, if I can virus, if I can spell correctly, it's something like this that you see in here, and it's a chart that shows you how it has the pandemic evolved over time. So what I'm going to do in there, it's I just started from the D3 histogram starter that we had, and then I'm going to append the data that we have for that. That is this one. So pretty much what I did in there, if you go in here and then you load the data, this comes in CSV. So like 1 week ago in September, my postdoc added the possibility, or the team added the possibility of loading CSVs out of file attachments. So now we can do this. So let's comment this one out. So we are not going to be using that data anymore. So actually, let's undo that. Oops. Something like this, I guess. That was kind of like a bug in there. So anyhow, so let's put this in here. So it's like right below the other thing. And then what you can see is that I have 36,000 rows in this data set. And the reason why I have that is that I have been taking the reports like daily. Like I took like all the 700,000 reports that we have to the moment of this recording. And then I'm grouping everything by the time at which they were reported. So that way I can go back and forward in time. So the first thing you will need to do is that, as you can see, we have a date in here, and the typical thing with those dates is that they come in strings. So the way of formatting those, let's create a time parser, and I think the time parser for this one, it's going to be uppercase year, lowercase m, I think, and lowercase d, I think. And then to make sure that that's the case, we can take like any of these dates, and then we can say a equals this and make sure that it works. And then we can say let's parse a, for instance. And then as you can see, it seems like it's doing it okay. Okay, so I have a good parser. So then what I can do is format this data. So I'm going to wait for the data to be uploaded and transformed. And then for each element in my data, what I'm going to do is that I am going to take my d.key and I'm going to parse it with my parser, d.key, as you can see in there. I'm also going to be using fizz as my y-axis attribute, so I'm going to convert that into a number. And I'm also going to be using another one that it's called fecha histórica. So that's Spanish for historic date. And then that's the one that I'm going to be filtering on for building this. So when I do that, I forgot to return the thing. So here is my data. Now you should see that I have two data objects in here and here. So let's go and change our histogram to get that. I'm not going to be using group data. My X attribute is going to be key and the Y attribute is going to be fizz, and then later we can change that. This one I'm going actually to use at scale time, and because of that, remember, scale band has like all of the, it's like a scale order, it has, in the domain you should pass all of the possible values. In here in scale time, I'm going to pass like the extent, D3 extent of my data, using as an accessor d.x attribute. For this one, this was using the y, the group data. So now I'm just going to be using data, and this is not a group anymore. and it's just going to be d.y attribute. And then we can check if our domains are okay. That looks fine. And then this one also looks fine. Good, perfect. So now I have that, like this thing is broken here. So I can get rid of, I'm not going to use text in here, only the bars. This should go with the data. And I don't have a bandwidth. So let's say, for instance, this is going to be 20. This it should be using for x, it should be using d.x attribute, so, and then pass that through the scale as you see in here. For y, it should be the same, like since we are passing the data directly, so it should be y attribute as you see here. We can change this to date, and then same thing, so just y attribute in here. And then with that, we have a bar chart. You see the bars are really big. So what I'm going to do in there is that I need to see how many fetches I have, like on x-axis. So one way of doing that is just by taking, for instance, and then by the way, like it's going to be drawing all of the 36,000, but I should only be selecting like some of those. Like for instance, if we say the data, and then we say in the last position of the data, -1, and then that fecha histórica, so that is the latest fecha histórica that we have. So let's say current date is going to be this. And then we can filter our data. And this filtered data is going to be the key for our animation. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to filter my data whenever, and notice the plus, d.fecha histórica equals current date. And that it's important, the plus is important. When you do that to a date, it will transform it into a Unix timestamp, which is the number that you can compare. You cannot compare dates themselves directly. So now that I do this, now I only will have, I hope, like one key, although I have some jumps in there, but I will have one key for each date that I have. So now I can have, although that would be a little redundant, so let's do it the other way around, because with the reactivity in here, we can get in a circle of definition. So let's say that our dates are going to be data, and then we are going to do a map of the dot, or like before we do that, so let me at the moment, oh yes, I see now what I wanted to do. So in here I can just say this is going to be my filter data, and then those are those, like all the bars, but only for that last one. And then I want to change this to something that resizes depending on the width of the number of dates that we have. That's what I wanted to see, how many possible keys we can have. So let's say keys, it's equal data, where I do a map and I extract the d.key, and I get like 36,000 of those. And then I want to create a set of that. And when I do that, I still get 36,000 because again, it doesn't know how to compare dates. And then I'm converting that into a timestamp. Then I'm going to extract the values so I can see that as an array. And for some reason that gives me an iterator, and the way of converting that into an array, it's putting that as the constructor, with the constructor array from. That gives me the dates, and then I want my date back. Whoa, what was that? How do I did that? I have no idea. So I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new date out of the timestamp that I have in there, and I have all of my dates. But this one, it's only to know what is going to be my bar width. So my bar width is going to be my width, or actually my I width, divided by the number of keys. Something like this, and of course, and then like this is an array, so that doesn't work. So what about this? Okay, so now that I have that, then I can say that my bars are going to have a bar width, and then I need to make sure that I offset this. So I'm going to offset it by bar width half. So now I have bars of the proper size. Having done that, I now can start showing like in my first animation. So my first animation is going to be a little bit of cheating. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use a control in here. If you search for my Bostock Scrubber, he has this very nice component where you can pass a bunch of elements, and then it gives you a play button, and then also lets you jump into different parts of it. So I'm going to import that, and then when you do that, then basically what I want is that I want to create a screwer here, and this screwer is going to be of my, did I call it dates? Didn't I select all of my dates? So I have my keys in here, and I thought I had done the same for my fechas históricas. So actually, let me do this one, but instead of using d3d.key, let me use fecha histórica, just for not repeating that twice. And I want to make sure that I only have fechas históricas that have a fecha histórica. And then what I'm going to do in here is that I'm going to pass these as keys. And then it is actually filtering by that. And it's going a little fast. So let's put a delay of 100 milliseconds. So now it's going a little bit slower. And it shouldn't repeat. So let's say false. So when it finishes, it doesn't do anything else. So now I'm doing this, and then I have my filter data. Okay. And my filter data, it's failing on me for some reason that I don't understand. So if I look at my current date, it's returning an HTML format. So very important, remember, if you put view off in here, then it's going to allow you to still display the HTML component, but in current date, you will get the current date. So at least now I have a current date, and this one, it's updating, and this one, it's updating as well, and it should be changing, but for some reason, oh, there we go. Now I start see changes in there, and now I can see it is actually working. So that will be like my first animation. As you can see, it's actually quite fluent, and it's very nice, and it's kind of like, and this is granted just for having observable. What happens in there is that every time I change this thing redraws. So if I want to go a little bit further than that, and let's say that I want the bars to actually grow to the position when I jump like this, then that's where I need to start doing my animations. So the only way of achieving that is by keeping this SVG like constant, and then letting D3 do the transition instead of having observable being the one of redrawing everything and drawing it again. So the way of doing that is that we get the part that does the updating, and then we put that into a different cell that we call, usually my Bostock likes to call update. And then if I want to do that, then I get into a problem, that is that I don't have my G drawing, that is this one in here. So I will need to have a way of selecting that. So I'm going to create a class in here, and I'm going to call it G drawing. And then having that, and given that I have my SVG in here, and I'm returning it here, at least the HTML element, so I can access this again by doing D3 select SVG, because this one was a selection, but I'm returning actually the element. And then from there, I'm going to select my G drawing. And then doing that, this cell, it's going to be is being called every time I move things, while this one doesn't, okay? So, and the key for this animation to happen is that I can actually say in here, like, you know what, everything that is below this is going to be an animation. So you do that by creating a sub selection that it's called a transition, and you say what is going to be the duration of your transition. And just with that, when you move in here, now it is nicely growing to that position, okay? Now, if we make this smaller, and one of the keys is that if you redraw this, now you have this nasty effect. And the problem for that is that it's doing that animation that changes all of the bar positions. And since they didn't exist before, then, and they didn't have a previous position, then it's starting from the bottom. Because what this transition is doing is that it's always, remember, this is selecting the bars. And since this is selecting bars that are already there, then it's checking what is the previous position, and then it's doing a transition to this one. But on the other ones, since they didn't exist, then they didn't have an X or Y, so that's why they changed like that. So we can fix that if you remember how to do advanced data binding, just by saying, I want to do something different when I create my bars. So I'm going to append, very important, you need to append your bars using, I guess, a rectangle, and then return that on your enter, and then you want to do something different with that. So in this case, what I'm going to say is that I'm going to copy all of this, because I could just paste it in here, but I don't want to repeat code. So instead, I want to say set bar attributes, and then this is going to be a bar. It's a function and takes a bar, and then it applies this to a bar. So the beauty of this is that now I can say in here call set bar attributes, and then this is going to be a function that takes the selection that we had in here and applies that. And the selection we have in here is the transition, so it's going to apply that to the transition. But then in here I can say I can do the same, and in this case it's not going to be the transition, it's going to be the newly created object. So in this case it's going to appear in there, whereas in the other one it's actually going to do the animation. So now if I reload this, it's not jumping anymore. Actually, remember that when I did this, it was jumping, now it isn't. So one of the things you can see is that now it's appearing. Like if you want to get fancier, like maybe you want it that when I first draw it, it goes from the bottom up. So remember, every time I redraw this, it's like if I'm just drawing it for the first time. So if you want to do that, if you want them to start from the bottom up, then what you can do is that you can say here on the enter, remember, this is happening only when the bar is created. Then we can say that the height is going to be 0, and on top of that, the position for y is going to be the I height. And the reason why you want the I to be I height is that such that the bar starts from the bottom and then goes all the way up. If you don't have that, if you only have the height starting on 0, then what is going to happen is this. If I can get this to reload, now the bars start from the top, and that's not what you want. So, and that makes sense because the y, we're establishing the y in a specific position, and then we're just making the height grow. So we actually want to start the height, the y on the bottom, and that way it grows up. Basically, one of the keys in here is that we are setting the y and the height in here as well, but I'm just redrawing and like rewriting with this one. And again, the key of transitions is that when you do D3 data binding, it's going to select the bars, it's going to find what is the position they are in, and then it's going to transition to whatever other position you say. This is whatever we're giving in here. Now, looking at this is looking way better now. So if I do my transitions now, it's still doing the drawing, but actually one of the things that bothers me is that as you can see in there, when it starts really slow. And it's because of the pandemic, like it's exponential growth, so it's not really showing me much. So what if I want to show, like maybe I want the y-axis to be changing to what is the maximum that was for that moment. So since I have all of the control in here, I can say that my y-axis, like the domain of it, it's going to be using my filter data. And just by doing that, then the key is that, as you can see now, it is starting from the element, but then you see that flickering in there, and then it's like kind of ruining my whole thing, and then you wonder why that's happening. And the reason for that is that, and this is an observable thing, is that I am changing my x-axis, my x-domain, my x-axis. So, and because of that, this cell is being changed. So if you see here, This one, it's actually, it will be depending on that x-axis. So because of that, I want to remove that, and then I don't want this one to depend on that. Actually, before doing that, let me make a way of selecting this. So I can say this is going to be my x-axis. And then this is going to be my y-axis. And I am going to be doing this update and this other update, I'm going to be doing that in update. So now with that, I remove the dependency of SVG on X and Y. And then I can come in here and then I can say, you know what, I want to take my G and I'm going to select the class that I just created, that is X-axis. And then on that one, I'm going to call that one. And I'm going to do the same one with this, on my Y-axis. And then doing that, update is the one that changes and depends on that. And if you see here, then now you can see that they are moving, but there is a problem in there, and it's going to be more apparent if the animation was smaller, and is that the axis is changing, but it's not changing at the same time. So I submitted once a suggestion for my boss talk for one of his examples, and he said, and I think it makes total sense, that you should let the user know like all of the time in what position he is, in like in all of the animation. So the way of controlling that is that we can also say that this is going to have a transition as well, and the other one too. And then you can also put a duration in there, but the problem is that those will be like separate transitions. So instead of doing that, what you can do is that you can take this, and then you can say, you know what, I'm not going to control that in there, and I'm actually going to create on my G, I'm going to create my transition here. And then you create like a unified transition, and then you call it T, like you see in here. And then that transition is the one that you're going to be using for this, is the one you're going to be using for this, and then you're going to be using for this. So these are synchronized transitions. Those are transitions that you're working on them together, and they cancel and start together. So once you do that, then you can see if we get started this, then they move like that. And then now you have a nice animation that it's actually very much synchronized with the x-axis. So you can do the same with areas or colors. For instance, in this chart you saw that I have it colored by the amount of cases by that day. So that's another way of doing that. And then I recommend you also taking a look at the examples, if I can go quickly in there. D3 transition, I think Mike created a good notebook not so long ago. Like for instance, this one is very good. There is a very good example here on the bar chart race, and where he actually will tell you how you can do those transitions. Like this attribute twin, it's very useful, for instance, for creating these type of things, and then that allows you to do transitions in many different ways. And also in the D3 transition collection, like you can find like this one, it's also very interesting, that shows you like different ways in which you can ease an animation. Like for instance, have something like this that starts slow and go faster, or do the same one but on the other way around. So play with this so you can see what are the different options, and that's how you create a transition using D3.